Here are a few people that have learned to lose billions of dollars. Find out how one person lost over $70 billion. Number 14, Björgolfur Gudmundsson. Björgolfur Gudmundsson was once the second richest man in Iceland and a major stakeholder in the Icelandic bank Landsbanki. But finance wasn't the only place where he made his money. Gudmundsson had first made a lot of money in brewing industry in Russia. But why in another country? Well, in the 1990s, he was sentenced to 12 months in prison for fraud. He had faced around 450 charges. When your home country is a small island of only 320,000 and you're a prominent business person, there's nowhere to hide. Because of that little scandal, he left to first make money in Russia. It took him less than 10 years to become one of the 250 richest people in the world, with businesses stretching from Bulgaria all the way to the US. Gudmundsson's net worth was at one time estimated to be as much as $3.5 billion. But then the financial crisis happened in 2008. His companies owed roughly $10 billion, nearly $1 billion of which he had personally guaranteed. He went into massive debt. He had to file the largest bankruptcy filing ever in Icelandic history at the time. His bankruptcy covered a massive $759 million of personal debt. Much of the reason behind Gudmundsson's massive fall was a result of the plummeting Icelandic economy. It was almost a total collapse of the Icelandic banking system. And it was because of his bank, the second largest bank in Iceland. However, amazingly enough, after that massive debt, he went back to being a billionaire again in a crazy comeback. Number 13, Jocelyn Wildenstein. Imagine having $2 billion. Would you be able to blow through that? Imagine how hard it would be to blow through $2 billion. But Jocelyn Wildenstein has somehow been able to do it. Back in 1999, Wildenstein, whose nickname is Catwoman, along with a whole assortment of cat-related nicknames, received a whopping $2.5 billion. Of course, it was in a divorce from her art dealer husband, Alec Wildenstein. However, just 2 decades later, it's gone. How? This Swiss-born socialite was all about the highlight. That and the plastic surgeries that earned her nickname Catwoman. What's more amazing than the amount of her plastic surgeries is the fact that in March of 2018, she filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. She listed the $900 check she gets from Social Security each month as her only source of income. She didn't have any checking or savings accounts, no retirement fund or pension plans, and no investments. Or at least that's what the filing said. Her personal property was valued at a little more than $16 million. She claimed that she owed roughly $6 million to her 16 creditors, but stated that she wanted to file Chapter 11 to avoid liquidation of her assets. She estimates the value of her wardrobe to be only $1,000 and the value of her jewelry at $0. She said her jewelry is worthless, despite often being seen in public wearing a 32-carat diamond ring. The details of her bankruptcy isn't what's important here. What's important was how she blew through a couple billion dollars. She was rumored to spend at least $1 million a month on random lavish purchases. But still, just how? Number 12, Alberto Villar. Back before the internet bubble burst in the early 2000s, Alberto Villar and his Amerindo Investment Advisors company made lots of money investing in young, high-tech companies. The thing about owning a lot of stock is that it's only on paper. Owning a bunch of stock in hot startups that skyrocketed up means that things could skyrocket down just as quickly. At one point, Villar had an estimated net worth of more than $1 billion. Well, those were the good times. Villar had a thing of being in the limelight. He wanted fame and recognition, so for example, he gave hundreds of millions of dollars to famous opera companies and charities in exchange for his name on plaques. In addition to the millions of dollars he already gave, he also would just go ahead and pledge much more. Following the crash of technology stocks in 2000, Villar pledged to carry on with his promises, even if that meant he would have to use money from his personal fortune and his company's income. However, he ultimately fell short and many promised donations as his money troubles piled up from his spending. In 2005, Villar was arrested for securities fraud. Authorities claimed that he had misappropriated client funds for personal use. By 2008, he was convicted of multiple counts of securities fraud and ultimately sentenced to 9 years in prison. A lesson to steer clear of fraud is obvious, but just as important is the lesson to not give away hundreds of millions of dollars when that money is coming straight from investors. Number 11, Patricia Kluge. Patricia Kluge was a popular model and socialite back in the 70s. During a trip to New York City, she met John W. Kluge, a German-American entrepreneur who was at one point in time the richest man in the U.S. with a net worth of roughly $5 billion back in 1980. He was the owner of media giant Metro Media. They got married in 1981 and after 9 years got a divorce. In her divorce settlement, Patricia only managed to get a $1 million per year settlement plus a mansion, a 200-acre, 45-room estate located in Charlottesville, Virginia. If you think about it, her ex-husband didn't give up much at all. So in 1999, Patricia decided to turn the estate she got into a business. She wanted to turn Charlottesville into the preferred wine destination of the East Coast. So she and her new husband, William Moses, opened Kluge Estate Winery. The business venture was a success at first, and soon their wines were being sold in five-star restaurants across the country. Kluge's wines were even served at Chelsea Clinton's wedding. With business booming, Kluge decided to expand aggressively. And this was where she bit off way more than she could chew. Over the next 5 years, she took out $65 million in loans. The money went into expanding wine production and building a super luxury subdivision called Vineyard Estates. The estates were supposed to include 24 multi-million-dollar homes with pools, outdoor kitchens, tennis courts, horse trails, and even space for private vineyards. And then the financial crisis in 2008 hit. Vineyard Estates failed to draw buyers. Property values plunged. In 2009, Kluge put her estate up for sale at $100 million. The figure was cut to $48 million in early 2010 and then to $24 million, where it sat until it was sold. Through foreclosure, she ultimately filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy in June 2011. Number 10. Bernie Madoff. You know Bernie Madoff. We're not going to get too deep into his story because you most likely know what he did. He entered financial history by swindling many wealthy people out of tens of billions of dollars in the largest Ponzi scheme in history. As early as 1999, whistleblowers reported to the SEC that Madoff's revenues were too impressive. Impressive to the point that they were almost mathematically impossible to obtain. This caused some of the most popular trading companies to stop working with him. But that didn't stop anything for his operations. But suspicions kept on growing. Supposedly in 2008, Madoff was reported to have confessed to his brother that he had over $5 billion in debt and that his business had been functioning fraudulently. In March 2009, Madoff pleaded guilty to 11 federal felonies, including fraud, money laundering, and the creation of a 20-year-old Ponzi scheme. He was sentenced to 150 years in prison to be served in a federal facility. Let's never forget, there's no such thing as a guaranteed return ever. Number 9. Aubrey McClendon. Not many billionaires start out by getting a degree in history, but, well, Aubrey McClendon did just that by getting a major in history from Duke University, and here we are talking about it. However, he did get a minor in accounting, and it was his first job as an accountant that made him realize he had a knack for the oil and natural gas business. That's the sector where Aubrey made his billions. After a couple of years at a public Oklahoma oil and gas company, he decided to start his own company in natural gas industry. In 1989, he co-founded Chesapeake Energy Corporation. Chesapeake became known for the uncommon locations it used for drilling and soon began making a lot of money. In 1993, he took the company public, and this proved to be his most successful move. The company's stock tripled to almost 3 times its value for a 3-year period. He helped build Chesapeake Energy into the nation's second biggest producer of natural gas, only behind ExxonMobil. By 2005, McClendon was considered one of the best performing CEOs in the United States by Forbes magazine. He could have just easily slowed down on the risk and focused on having some fun. You know he didn't because he's on this list. In 2008 was where things started to crumble. Extreme borrowing, aggressive financing, and plunging oil and gas prices all combined to bring down Chesapeake shares by 80%. McClendon was forced to sell nearly all of his own shares to meet margin calls. The company had to write down billions. The risk he took for his company didn't exactly make too much sense. McClendon had Chesapeake's acquire leases to so much land that it would have taken them over 30 years to drill it all. He argued that it was money well spent because there's only a small window to get good acreage for low prices. But how much sense does it make when the company has to pay interest for the debt it took on? And what value is it to shareholders for Chesapeake to be sitting on gas fields it wouldn't get around to drilling for a decade or more? It's like if Tesla Tesla built hundreds of thousands of Teslas and then just kept it in storage to sell decades later because electric cars are going to get more expensive. It only makes sense if the price of oil stayed high, but we know that oil prices didn't stay high forever. And that's when he started losing hundreds of millions of dollars in net worth. In 2012, it was reported that McClendon had used over $1 billion in personal loans from the company's funds to pay off the other companies who were lenders to Chesapeake. The long and the short of it is, most of McClendon's net worth was tied to Chesapeake stock. He lost $1 billion, but hey, he was still making millions a year. By 2016, McClendon had already left the company and started another one called American Energy Partners. It all came crashing down on March of 2016. McClendon was indicted by a federal grand jury for allegedly conspiring to rig bids for oil and natural gas leases. A day after his indictment, he had a fatal car crash. He basically crashed straight into a wall. Does this sound suspicious to you? Number 8. Huang Wenji. Huang Wenji was continuously listed among the most successful and richest businessmen of China. He's one of the chairmen of China Jichang Holdings. The company produces and sells umbrellas and umbrella parts. Yes, umbrellas. This allowed Wenji to, at one point, accumulate a known net worth of $1.9 billion. This was mainly based on the valuation the company had. At one point, Wenji and his wife owned 75% of the company. That made sure that most of the company's profits would be saved within the family. Unfortunately for them, this would all change. This story is actually pretty cut and dry. He was another paper billionaire who saw his fortune go up in smoke. A dramatic crash on the Hong Kong stock market caused the company's stock to lose 94% of its value, and it all happened in a day. Back in 2017, Wenji saw his net worth take a major hit. Long story short, his company never should have been valued as high as it was. It seems like the share value was that high because of manipulation. So should he really have been part of this video? We'll leave that one for you to decide. To this day, the company's stocks have virtually no value. It's safe to say this is the main reason Wenji disappeared from the list of the most successful businessmen in China. Number 7. Bernie Ebbers. Bernie Ebbers was one of the most prolific businessmen in the U.S. He actually started his business career by first managing a chain of motels in Mississippi, but that's not where he made his money. His big break was joining investors to form Long Distance Discount Services. 2 years later, he was named CEO. Long Distance Discount Services quickly acquired over 60 other independent telecommunication firms. This group ended up changing its name to WorldCom in 1995. Does the name WorldCom ring a bell to you? Yep, this was the company that had one of the biggest accounting scandals ever. At the time, the company's bankruptcy was the biggest case of corporate fraud in U.S. history. Ebbers' world was WorldCom, and WorldCom was him. He had built the company, he ran it, and he did the fraud. At his financial peak in 1999, Ebbers was worth an estimated $1.4 billion. He was listed at number 174 on the Forbes 400. With all this money, what happened? Well, essentially, it was just his spending. His expenses were just out of control. Does this sound like a recipe for disaster? Yes. And this is one of the reasons why athletes go broke. Find out more in this video here. So much so that between 2000 and 2002, Ebbers started using WorldCom stock holdings to back up over $400 million in personal loans. This was somehow done with the company's board of directors' permission. How did anyone on the board not see a problem there? And that's when the wheels started to fall off. Ebbers was obsessed with keeping WorldCom's share price high, and rightfully so. He was panicked about the pressure over the loans. If share prices dropped, then he would have needed to put up even more collateral for his huge loan. So to make sure that didn't happen, he just had his company cook the books. He made sure the numbers met expectations for Wall Street. That way WorldCom's stock price did not drop. But it all came crashing down when an internal auditor began asking questions about curious accounting at WorldCom. Investigators eventually unearthed $11 billion in cooked books. Ebbers was sentenced to 25 years in prison in 2005. WorldCom investors brought a class action civil suit against him for his role as well, where the case reached a settlement. On paper, Ebbers was left with an estimated $50,000 after the settlement. Number 6. Adolf Merkel. Adolf Merkel was born in Dresden, Germany, into an already wealthy family. However, he took the small chemical wholesale company his grandfather had created and turned it into one of Germany's most successful pharmaceutical companies. But he also expanded his empire in other industries as well, such as a company in the cement business and a company in the recycling business. Merkel's net worth was estimated at around $12.8 billion back in 2007. However, an unfortunate series of events happened for Merkel just 1 year later. Merkel had an investment company called VEM. This company faced some serious liquidity difficulties and somehow had owed banks over 5 billion euros. So Merkel had to take out even more loans to keep up the payment schedule to keep VEM afloat. Is this sounding familiar? So he ended up using shares of his cement company as collateral for the loans. However, there was the recession back in 2008. The market share of the value plummeted more than 75%. Of course, the banks asked for more collateral on the loan and for even quicker payments on the earlier loan. Everything was quickly spiraling out of control. On top of that, he also had shorted shares of Volkswagen. Well, it turns out that Volkswagen shares shot up almost 5 times in value. This caused him to lose over $500 million. Unfortunately, in January 2009, Merkel put himself in front of a moving train. His family said that he had been broken by his losses, even though he still had around $6 billion left. Number 5. Sean Quinn. With a steady growth on his investments, Sean Quinn managed to become the richest man in Ireland. Well, at one point, Quinn built his empire with a humble £100 loan in 1973. He started selling gravel he extracted from his family's farm, and thus created what became to be the foundation of his fortune, Quinn Cement. This first endeavor gave place to a bunch of other businesses. He was in a whole bunch of industries, such as the hospitality industry with Quinn Hotels, insurance with Quinn Direct, and finance with Quinn Financial Services, just to name a few. He also held a 25% stake in Anglo-Irish Bank, which had to be bailed out by taxpayers during the 2008 financial crisis. In 2008, his net worth was an estimated 4.7 billion euros. But then came the recession. By 2009, the Anglo-Irish Bank had collapsed, with its shares falling to 20 cents apiece. The Irish government took over the bank's operations, and Quinn saw a big chunk of his fortune, almost 3 billion euros, wiped away. At one point, the Irish Bank Resolution Corporation, which took over Anglo-Irish Bank, said Quinn owed the bank more than 2 billion euros. Quinn was later charged with contempt of court for attempting to hide assets from the bank in an effort to avoid paying back his debts. He was declared bankrupt in 2012, and he was sentenced to 9 weeks in jail for his little shenanigan of trying to hide assets. Number 4. Elizabeth Holmes. Back in 2014, Theranos and its CEO, Elizabeth Holmes, were on top of the world. At the time, Theranos was a revolutionary company started by Holmes. She was hailed as a genius who thought of herself as the female Steve Jobs. Holmes was the world's youngest female self-made billionaire with a net worth of around $4.5 billion. Then it all came crashing down. Basically, almost everything about Theranos was made up. Holmes had supposedly come up with technology that was able to perform blood tests that would only use a few drops. The idea came from her fear of needles as the main motivation. There were skeptics from her peers, but Holmes just played down the denials. In 2015, an in-depth investigation by a Wall Street Journal journalist revealed the shocking truth. Theranos' testing method was flawed, and they had to use commercial blood testing machines to get the correct results. Theranos' fake technology was exposed, along with the role Holmes played in covering it all up. The company faced a lawsuit by the SEC for falsely reporting $100 million in revenue, when in fact, the company only made $100,000. Holmes was charged with fraud, and the company was forced to close its labs and testing centers. In 2016, Fortune named Holmes one of the world's most disappointing leaders. In June 2018, there came the news that Holmes reportedly looked for investors for a new startup. As part of her settlement with the SEC, Holmes agreed to give up financial and voting control of Theranos. And while she can't be the CEO of a public company for 10 years, she's still allowed to be the CEO of a privately held company. But really, should she be trusted with any investor money so soon after completely lying about her company's capabilities? Number 3. Vijay Mallya. Vijay Mallya isn't a household name in the US, but he's quite well known in his native India. He was the wealthiest liquor baron and owned the now-defunct Kingfisher Airlines. He was reportedly worth around $1.5 billion at one point. He lost his fortune largely because of taking on, surprise, surprise, massive debts. Let's also add on lavish spending, financial fraud, and money laundering. As authorities were getting close to charging him with his crimes, he fled the country. After saying he wanted to move to Britain to be closer to his children, Mallya left India in March 2016, and by the way it looks, he doesn't plan on returning. To this day, the Indian government is still actively trying to extradite him from the UK to face charges of financial crimes in India. Mallya was once nicknamed the King of Good Times because of his extravagant lifestyle, but his companies have been embroiled in financial scandals and controversy since 2012. For example, back in 2013, Kingfisher Airlines hadn't paid its workers for more than 15 months. A group of 17 Indian banks are still trying to collect approximately $1.3 billion in loans he had taken out. Mallya's companies have faced a series of controversies that have resulted either in dissolution, theft, or bankruptcy. He was later arrested on April 2017 by the UK Metropolitan Police and later released on bail, but with the condition of not being able to leave the United Kingdom. Number 2. Ike Batista. Ike Batista fell a long way. At his financial height, he was the richest man in Brazil. At the lowest, well, you're about to find out. He made his money largely through Brazilian natural resource companies, but he also ran up debt. A lot of it. He started his entrepreneurial journey at age 18 selling insurance door to door. He then became a gold and diamond trader. By 29, Batista had become the CEO of TVX Gold. From 1980 to 2000, he created a whopping $20 billion in value gold and silver mines. By 2011, Batista was ranked as the 8th richest person in the world and the richest person in Brazil. However, his businesses crashed in early 2012. At one point, he was worth an estimated $35 billion. By July 2013, it was estimated to be less than $300 million. That's still a lot of money, but you have to realize that's a drop of more than 99% of his original net worth. But wait, things got worse. In 2014, Bloomberg reported that Batista had a negative net worth, and he himself agreed. He was later quoted saying that his net worth was actually approximately negative $1 billion. Just wow. So in order to change his luck, he went to see a priest. The priest suggested to him that, quote, everything he had taken has to be returned in some way, and this could be done by a ritual showing gratitude. So Batista decided to toss gold coins worth more than $150,000 into the ocean. Does this make any sense to you? Obviously, it didn't work because he still took losses. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison in July of 2018. Number 1. Masayoshi Son. Masayoshi Son founded SoftBank, Japan's largest telecom and internet company. His first business endeavors began when he was a student at UC Berkeley. With the help of some professors, Son invented an electronic translator that he sold to Sharp Corporation for $1.7 million. He made another $1.5 million by importing used video game machines from Japan and installing them in dormitories and restaurants. And then from there, he just kept making moves and building wealth and eventually became a billionaire and the richest person in Japan at the time. However, he has the distinction of losing the most amount of money known in history, as he lost nearly $70 billion in the dot-com crash of 2000. When the internet bubble burst, shares of SoftBank went down 98%, and that's what affected Son's net worth so much. But he's still far from broke. In 2019, Forbes ranked him as the 43rd richest person, as he still has a net worth of roughly $23 billion. Even though he's taken the biggest loss in history, let's just say this guy is still winning in life heavily right now. Watch this next video to learn about the one reason why athletes go broke.